cents in the same week of 1953. And can you tell me of any agricultural commodity that has had a dramatic rise in prices from almost, well, from $6 to $7? It would be almost 15%, wouldn't it? 16 2/3% if it was a sixth. Any food commodity gone up 16 2/3%? Actually, over the same period of time, all of those commodities, practically all of them, unless there's a vegetable or a citrus or a deciduous fruit in here, all of them have come down. And yet the price index of food to the American consumer in the city is up. And yet he's being told every day in the newspaper, just help us break these prices a little further and we'll begin to bring those prices down. Well, it is just an impossible and completely dishonest statement. So much for that. Let me talk about tax relief. Because they say, you know, that farm programs have been costly, and lowering price supports will affect great savings to all. And then let me read to you what the President said. He indicated that we would have been able to balance the budget except for two things: some tax adjustments, and farm programs have been costly in 1953. Well, gentlemen, if you got it, take $1 out of your pocket, will you? If you got a silver dollar, all right. If you got a paper dollar. I just want to do some simple mathematics. There's your tax dollar. You know how much of that goes for defense? 75 cents out of that tax dollar, or 3/4 of it, goes for defense. That's what you got left for everything else. 25%. Out of that 25%, 10% goes for the interest on the national debt and for veterans programs. So that when you get through with that, you got 15 cents. 15 cents runs all the rest of your government. 85% out of every one of your tax dollars, 85% of it goes for past wars or to be prepared for a future war. Now, I'm not arguing against it. As a matter of fact, I think maybe we ought to be spending a little more on planes and a few other things, as Stu Symington has been saying, Senator Symington has been saying. But that's neither here nor there. I want that point clear, that I'm not against the expenditures for defense if they're spent half as efficiently as we spend them in agriculture. But 15 cents out of every tax dollar you will pay between now and March 15th, if you haven't paid your income taxes yet, goes to run all the rest of your government. It pays Ike's salary. It runs that White House. It runs the Supreme Court. It runs all the federal courts. It runs all the reclamation programs. It runs the post office department. It runs everything in this government. 15 cents out of your tax dollar runs everything in this government except the Defense Administration, the interest on the national debt, and veterans programs. And do you know how much of that 15 cents goes for agricultural programs? 1 penny and 2 mills. 1 2/10 cents go for the agricultural programs. All of them. Forest Service, Soil Conservation Service, all of the research, all of the agricultural economics, and everything else we take care of with 1 penny and 2 mills out of your tax dollar. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let me go back to what the President said. If we weren't stuck with some part of that 1/10, 1 penny and 2 mills, we'd be halfway down the way to adjusting, to balancing the American tax budget. I can't imagine of anything more out of line with reality and out of line with fact. In other words, if we shut the Department of Agriculture down, and we fired the Secretary of Agriculture and everybody down to the guy who sweeps the joint out as he goes home in the evening, you could cut your tax bill by 1 penny and 2 mills on every dollar. And yet someone says to me, it is because that 1 penny and 2 mills, some small portion of it, is out of adjustment, that I can't balance a $76 billion budget, did you say, Leon? Something like that. It's as unrealistic, and if it wasn't the President of the United States that said it, I think we'd be a little more explicit about how we described it. Just remember that every time somebody says to you, farm programs are expensive, and you folks are a burden upon the taxpayer, take them out. Take out that dollar if you've got one left, and tell him about it. Because honestly, he'll be convinced. And if he don't want to believe you, tell him to write his congressman or his senator, because this has been said on the floor of the House and the Senate every year for the past 4 or 5 years that I know of. Senators from this part of the country, congressmen from this part of the country have put that information into the record. And when they tell you that farm programs have cost $14 billion, you tell them that up until this year, I've always been told that they only cost about $1.3 billion. And that's what I've been told by the bookkeepers in the Department of Agriculture as long as I was there. So I got to reading what happened, the price support programs. So I got to reading about what happened to make up the $14 billion. And of course they had the Hoover Farm Board, which was a very substantial loss of several $1 billion or more. They had soil conservation activities, soil conservation payments, the consumer subsidies during the war, which were as a result of shortage, not as a result of sustaining prices for American farmers. It was because we had a shortage, and we kept the price down by price controls, and then and subsidized the cost of the food moving to consumers. That cost $3 or $4 billion. And all of those, they got together, and somehow they added up $14 billion. But let me just quote to you from a newspaper of a few weeks, about 2 months ago. They were analyzing this thing because I'd made a speech in that community, and they wanted to be sure I was right. As a matter of fact, they hoped I was wrong so they could give me a public spanking. But they printed an editorial, and this is a strong Eisenhower paper, the Denver Post. And they said, we've looked into the matter carefully, and we discovered that the price support program for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 1953, cost the American people 40 cents per capita. 40 cents per capita in a whole year for farm price support programs for the year ending 53. Because of the dairy program, operated, I think, in an ineffective and inefficient way, it's going to be more this year. I'm not sure how much. And then they went back and said, over the period of all price support programs since 1935 or 37, the cost to the American people has been $10 per capita. $10 per capita per year, for the whole period, not per year. Not per year, not $10 per capita per year, but $10 over the whole period of the history of farm price support programs. And that was a newspaper which was militantly in favor of the present administration. And then do you ever notice in the newspapers that it says we got $4 billion and $5 billion of people's money tied up in farm programs? Well, let me just ask you to explain this to you. When that money which is loaned to you farmers under price support operations is not people's tax money. It's not taken out of the budget at all. Actually, when the Secretary of Agriculture wants $1 billion or whatever he wants to loan farmers to stabilize the price of wheat, he goes to the Secretary of Treasury and he says, I need so much money. I want to loan it to farmers against good security, against the best security there is in the world, food. And the Secretary of Agriculture Treasury, he don't turn around in his Treasury vault and get that money. He goes up to New York and he borrows it. And the first note I signed for it as President of Commodity Credit Corporation we paid 0.7% interest. Today, we're paying 2.5 or 3%. I haven't seen the notes lately for some unaccountable reason, but they're paying somewhere in the neighborhood of at least 2.5% on the same money borrowed. And if we lose the money, then of course it would ultimately be taken out of your tax debt. But on the wheat program, we've never lost money. We made $85 million over the course of the wheat price support program, and the cotton program made $500 million. And we gave $250 million back to farmers and put the other $250 million in the Treasury of the United States. So when you see the $5 billion, the $6 billion, don't think of it, don't be deceived into thinking that that is your tax money and that somehow you took part of that $5 billion and put it in the Treasury. No, they borrowed it. And actually, we're going to make money on it. If this drought keeps on down in my part of the country, we're apt to make an awful lot of money on grains again. I hope we don't, because if we make money by the rise in the price of grains, then some farmer has been sadly hurt. And I hope we don't have to make it that way. But just remember again now, when they start throwing $4 and $5 billion in commodity loans at you, that we're going to lose some on the butter program as we did on the potato program. And I always want to remind myself of this too. We lost $500 million under a very bad potato price support program. But do you know where almost $225 million of it went? To the American railroads. Hauling the doggone potatoes around. That's where we've spent 200 and almost 25 million. Out of the $500 million that is charged up to a loss against potatoes, $225 million went to the railroads to haul the potatoes around. Now, if we had to haul the potatoes around, I'm glad the railroads got the work. But it seemed to me that that wasn't a very good and efficient use, a way to support the price of potatoes. And as you know, I was one of those that said, let's dye them and leave them out there so we don't have to buy them again. And boy, did I didn't have much hair when I said that, but I had less when they got through with it. But just one more thought now, to draw a comparison. Has anyone in this room any idea what it costs, how much money you have got invested as taxpayers in military equipment any day? Well, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 billion. $25 billion, and it's your tax money. This isn't borrowed from the bankers and interest paid on it. $25 billion at any time is tied up in tanks, guns, planes, and all the machinery of death. And I'm not against it. I'm not against it. But I just want to say, just want to think about it in this terms. $25 billion tied up in tanks, in planes, in big guns, in powder, in bombs, and everything else. But that tank would never move up to the line of battle. That plane would never take off the end of the runway. Those guns would never be fired if there wasn't food for the stomachs of the men who had to mend. We don't worry about putting all kinds of money in gasoline to run the tank up to the line of battle. We don't worry about putting $1 billion or $2 in powder to blow the projectile out at the enemy. But when we get loaned out to American farmers, just $2 or $3 or $4 billion, and let's say for a moment that it was tax money. What better could your tax money be invested in than human food as compared with the machinery of death? Nobody in my experience has been the least bit disturbed about $25 billion in the machinery of death, and I very seldom pick up a paper but find great consternation about just $3 or $4 billion loaned to American farmers in a price stabilization program and secured by the very thing without which all of this machinery of death wouldn't even begin to move. The sustenance of life, $3 or $4 billion in loans, $25 billion invested in the machinery of death, and you're never going to get a dime back from it. Most of it will obsolete in 5 years. At least 30% of it will be obsolete in a year, because the enemy will have a better plane, so we'll obsolete these and we'll build a faster plane. We build a tank with an inch of armor on it, and the enemy gets a gun that'll pierce an inch of armor. So we obsolete these tanks and we build another one with an inch and a half of armor. So even this equipment in which our tax money is invested is going to be completely obsolete, and it's your tax money. And I've never heard a soul worry about it, but and particularly all of these people who worry about the business of having a few loans, a few $1 billion of loans on the most important commodity in all of American history. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we can't stand on the negative side of it, so I just want to, in closing, talk to you just a minute or two about the positive side. What do these programs mean? Did the American people get something out of the investment? Do they get something out of price stability? Of course they do. Because when we make it possible for the American farmer to get a fair return at the end of the year, when he's invested his labor, his skill, the resources of his soil, the fertility of his soil, his machinery, and all the rest of the things that goes to make a good crop. And the good Lord has blessed it with rain and good growing conditions, and he comes and he lays it on the counters of America. And then we say to him, because you've done your job well, because you've done your job efficiently, because you've learned to be a better farmer and use our soil resources more effectively, we shall not penalize you because you have produced abundantly. The sliding scale says to the American people and the American farmer, when you have produced abundantly, when the God has blessed you with good moisture and good growing conditions, and you have brought a little more to the marketplace than will clear at a fair price to you, well, we're going to fix you. We're going to jerk the rug out from under you and the prices go down. And we're going to teach you not to plant so many crops next year. I don't know of anything more unjust, more unreasonable, and more unfair to American people anywhere than to say to them that when you have produced the abundance for which man has prayed from the very dawn of history, that your reward shall be no price, or a cheap price. Then you can go home broke. And whether you pay on the mortgage or not, we don't care. Whether the kids stay in school or not, we don't care. Whether or not you can buy the things in the windows and in the stores and on the show floors of the towns and cities across the country, we don't care. We just are going to penalize you for having produced abundantly. That is the theory and the philosophy and the sole objective of the sliding scale. Don't let anybody ever tell you that the idea is that price supports bring high production. You know very well that when we got a short crop, you don't need a price support. The price is up there, isn't it? The price of beef was 150% of parity for the last 4 or 5 years until just after Mr. Eisenhower was inaugurated. The price of beef had been coming down, I admit that, but it was way up high, and there wasn't any price support program. There has never been a price support program for beef. You don't need a price support program to encourage production at all, in the sense of the price stability. But you do need it when we have achieved abundance and we bring the abundance and lay it on the counters of America. Then we say we are not going to let the law of supply and demand ruin these farmers because they did an efficient job. Now that's easy to say to our friends. I think it is. I've always believed it. I never had any trouble with the price support program or its philosophy or its theory. And I immediately pegged the sliding scale for the vicious, cruel thing that it really is. And from the very beginning, I've said exactly what I've said to you tonight. But in addition to keeping our economy healthy, as Leon said, remember, what have the American people got out of this? We've gotten world leadership and total, and in the true sense of the word, the highest standard of living. In 1800, in this country, 85% of us were engaged in the business of producing food to feed ourselves. Today, only 17% are engaged in feeding ourselves, and enough for a great world trade. And what's happened to the people between the 85% and the 17%? They're the people that are in the factories. They're the people who are doing the great research. They're the people who are running our great educational institutions. We are not like China or India or Pakistan or many other countries on the face of the earth where the total national interest is engaged and concerned with just producing enough food to barely live. No, we have released ourselves. We have released ourselves from the job of all of us trying to produce food, and have then moved into becoming the great industrial power that we are. And we are 7%, and this is apropos. We are 7% of the peoples on the face of the earth, and we get 40% of all of the world's income. Do we get it just out of growing wheat and selling it in the marketplace and other foods, like most countries are, agricultural nature? No, we got it because we produced a great industrial power in this country. And with this great industrial power, we have sold our goods of all kinds all over the face of the earth, and we get 40%. Russia has got 9% of the people of the world and get only 7% of the total world's income. And all the rest of the world, England, France, and all the other countries, share the other 60%. And we got it, ladies and gentlemen, because the American farmer had learned how to use his resources efficiently and intelligently. And in the midst of the 20th century, he has been so efficient and so intelligent, and he has taken care of his land so well that sometimes we are able to produce just a little more than will clear the market. And shall his reward be bankruptcy, price breaking, destruction of the family farm, and driving him out on the highways, as we did in 1928, 9, 30, 31, and 32? No. An enlightened Congress has said no, that is not the reward of the American farmer. And the American Congress will continue to say that if just a few people enough people can understand it. And so I just hope that as we go about our daily tasks, talking to our neighbors, we'll understand just enough of what is fundamentally involved here to be able to help them understand it. Because American people are decent. American people are fundamentally fair. The city dweller doesn't want, in any way, shape, or form, to injure his farmer cousin or his farmer friends. And that goes for lots of them. You know, I read you that statement by Benson, and do you know what happened immediately afterward? Well, here it is. It's a letter from Walter Reuther of the CIO. And he sat down and he wrote Benson, and he wrote Cliff Hope. And he said, I just read where Benson is trying to marshal the consumers of the country to destroy farm programs. And I want to tell you, we're not for it. And the other great labor leaders are of the same frame of mind. They see that if they destroy purchasing power, then their factories, the factories in which their men are employed, will turn off the lights, and there will be less and less employed. They already know that in some of the farm machinery plants in South Chicago, that men with 14 years seniority, and this is a distant relative of mine, men with 14 years of seniority are working 3 days a week. Men with 12 years seniority aren't working at all, building farm machinery, because we've already cut farm income to the place where they're not buying all the machinery that they would like or need. They understand that. So we're not fighting alone, and we are fighting with the greatest tool or the greatest weapon that any man can ever be equipped with, and that's truth and the righteousness of our cause. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because I'm sure we're going to work and understand and fight this fight intelligently. I'm optimistic because the Farmers Union has leadership in Washington working day and night on this problem, trying to give this same kind of information that we've been talking about this afternoon to the members of the Congress, to the city congressmen, for whom it is politically wise to do the other. It's politically wise for a congressman from New York State to be against farm programs, because if his people believe that cheap prices to farmers mean cheap prices to consumers, then he's on the popular side. But we're going to convince them and equip them to convince their constituencies. And when we do, we're going to win the fight. It's a glorious fight, and it's worth fighting every day. It's fun. It's truly a stimulating business. I've never worked at anything I enjoyed so much as working for and with the great Farmers Union. And I thank you all for the privilege of being able to do so. Thank you very much.